Good evening, everyone. Welcome. I will call our October 22nd, 2024 regular meeting of the Board of Directors to order. Thank you to those attending in person tonight and those staying engaged by watching our recording at a later time. The public is reminded that if they wish to speak during community comment, they will need to fill out a speaker form located in the lobby on the table and turn it in to Board Secretary Kim Coven, seated at the end of the table on my left. Comments will take place during the designated community comment portion of our agenda. And before we move into tonight's agenda, I want to take a moment to introduce those at the table with me. To my right, we have Superintendent Degner, Directors Eystone, Eastham. I'm President Malone. To my left, we have Vice President Abraham, Directors Finch and Lingo, and Board Secretary Kim Coven. With those introductions, we can jump into tonight's agenda. And the first thing is our education showcase. And we will hear from the Hills team, or Superintendent Degner. Did you want to introduce them before I steal all the thunder?
No problem. Thank you, President Malone. So we're going to welcome Principal Thompson up here with us. She's going to give us a nice overview of that transition that we led over at Alexander with the Hills community, now being served at Alexander Elementary. Katie had the opportunity to deliver this to DPO here last week or the week before. And so I think you'll find a lot of the efforts they took to make that environment welcoming and inclusive to the Hills community, and they have gotten off to a great start to the school year. So with that, Principal Thomas.
Yeah. Good evening. I'm glad to be here tonight and showcase our intentional efforts that we did as a collaborative effort between Hills and Alexander, and then some of the things that we took as a new and improved Alexander community and rolled with. Okay. Let me make sure I can toggle here. Great. So I wanted to start with our Alexander mission. We are a community dedicated to the relentless pursuit of equity, excellence, and empowerment for every Falcon every day. You'll notice the themes of excellence come up throughout quite a few of our intentionalities in this huge transition. So the first thing that we try to root and ground our staff with is this statement of belief page, which is really our mission in action. So I could click on this and it could make it a little bit bigger. I apologize, it's a small visual, but what this is something that we all agree to as educators at Alexander Elementary, no matter what your role is. And we read through them, we agree to them, we sign off, and then we proudly display this in all of our spaces at Alexander Elementary. And this is something that all of our new staff that joined us were able to get on board with, and it's something that really grounds our work every single day. A large topic. The reason I'm here today is to talk about the Hills transition. So we'll start with some intentionalities that we had with staff and that we had with students, because it was a big transition for both. So this is a comprehensive list of all of the new staff members that were at Alexander Elementary for this school year. This is a lot of adults, and every adult that you see that's in bold is an adult that came to us from Hills. So you can see the sheer number of adult presence that was there for our students at Alexander to start the school year. And I truly believe that that has been one of the most tremendous reasons that this has been a successful transition, is just for the students coming to us from Hills to see so many familiar faces every single day. And they've been tremendous additions to the staff as well. So in the spring, the last time I was here speaking with you with my colleague Reagan, we talked about the committee that we assembled to do some really intentional things in the spring once the news was made to close Hills. So in the spring, we use this committee to come together and do a few specific things. So one of the things that the committee did was we hand wrote postcards and translated when necessary as well to every single incoming Hills family. They were Alexander postcards with our Alexander logo on them, just welcoming them to our school. So families received those probably in May. We had a Alexander field trip for all of the Hills students where they got on buses and they came over to Alexander, and it was super well organized. They did a scavenger hunt throughout our school. One of the themes that we kept hearing in feedback from the Hills families was just concern over how big Alexander's building is in comparison to Hills's building. And so we wanted to make sure that everyone had an opportunity to see the beauty that is our building and the facilities that we could showcase. So the scavenger hunt was a great way to do that. And if you look carefully at these pictures here, we have Archie greeting the Hills students as they got off the bus that day. He's wearing, it's hard to see because you can't see his front, but he's wearing a black t-shirt. It's a Hills Lightning Bolt t-shirt. So, just lots of little details that we tried to do to make it special. And then the lower picture is a picture of our gym. We have this beautiful Falcon mural in our gym, and every single group from Hills posed for a picture underneath that mural that day. So also in the spring, our PTO, which was integral in helping this transition as well, our PTO held an arts night, and we were intentional about welcoming all Hills families and community members to that. And then we had one more family night in the spring that was just exclusive to Hills family, and it was more of a, come and see our building, and it was just for them. So that was really special. A few more intentionalities. So in the spring, I went to Hills quite a few times and visited with students, usually during their lunch and recess time. It was a great opportunity to get some social connections there. Our special education teams did some really intentional collaboration. We did some observation where they were able to go see students that were identified, included in the classroom setting, and already start to make plans of how that might look for them when they come to Alexander. We worked with our equity team and did a culturally responsive PD in May where we invited the staff joining us at that time from Hills to participate. We took that learning and applied that culturally responsive lens to our class rostering, and we did what we call vertical articulation, where third grade met with fourth grade meets with fifth grade, and you just talk through the needs and complexities of that group just to better set them up for the next year. I like to joke about this when we did some materials management and repurposing. We were able to repurpose quite a few things from Hills Elementary. My favorite being lots and lots of boxes of paper, because if you know anything about an elementary setting, we go through a lot of paper. So when there was a full shed that was full of paper at Hills, we took advantage of that. And we're actually getting the shed too. So I see Ben here. Our PTO hosted some play dates. We went to Hills, brought our Alexander community into Hills, and did some play dates this summer. And one more way that I supported our adults, just if you go back to that list of so many new staff in the building, I started something this year called Professional Partners, where I strategically aligned kind of original longtime Alexander staff members with new Alexander staff members. And so these were people that our new staff could go to for any kind of question, and somebody not necessarily on their team. Okay, we did quite a bit of professional development around Tier 1 universal social emotional behavioral health needs. We anticipated a little bit of a rough start behaviorally with this, joining of two strong communities. And so we wanted to be really intentional about how to set our teachers up for success, how to give them tools to support, these big emotions coming from whether, original Alexander students that might be feeling kind of territorial, or Hill students that might, be coming with a lot of emotions around not being at their old school. So we worked in the summer with a core group of PBIS Tier 1 leadership, and we developed some, we called it Beefed Up Tier 1, where we just added some extra responses in our classrooms to really give teachers the tools to support students, keep students in the classroom, and to manage, unwanted behaviors that way. So this image shows our hierarchy of responses, and this is our Alexander version of this. We modified it and added a few things because it's easy to get in a pattern as a teacher of just sending a student out of your classroom when you're frustrated or when they're frustrated. And we knew how important community would be this year, and that's the last thing that we really want, is to make anyone feel like they're not welcome. So this hierarchy of responses gave our staff quite a few tools to use to manage any kind of behaviors that were taken away from learning. We also have our monthly PBIS Tier 1 leadership teams where we look at behavioral data and we celebrate things as a community. I have an example of that. So in September, this is actually copied paste from email. This is an exact email that our staff got. We had a building-wide monthly community celebration focused on Falcon families, where we mixed up grade levels. We had students in different mixed up groups, and they went into different learning spaces and they played a little game of Would You Rather. So just, you can see the intentionalities that we have around building strong community between all of our students. So our theme this year at Alexander is to ignite your excellence, which ties back to our mission and our vision. It's also a nod to Hills Elementary, the lightning bolts. And so we actually modified our Archie graphic here, where now he's holding a lightning bolt. And we're pulling that, idea of excellence into everything that we're doing this year. A little history on Alexander, we've always had a theme every year. And so it was just extra special to be able to connect this year's theme to such a big transition. So students can get shout outs they're called Spark Notes. And if they're igniting excellence, teachers write their name, they write down a couple of details of how they were, because we're focusing on community, how they were including others, how they were building a new relationship, or how they were being kind. And so we're just trying to highlight those excellent choices by our scholars. And then you have an example here of our bell ringer. We are really proud of our bell at Alexander. We ring it all the time whenever there is some kind of success, staff or students. So we're going to continue to ignite excellence. I have some great pictures here. You, as the board, you've heard from our ukulele club before. I'm happy to report that this year's group is really large and it's representative of our school. There are students from Hills that signed up. We're just really happy. We have a picture here of one of our third grade teachers, Mrs. Harbison, who came from Hills. And we have Mrs. Ramsey down below, one of our interventionists. So we are definitely new and improved, and it's been a really, really strong fall so far at Alexander. Any questions or comments?
Well, we certainly have to come in and congratulate and say thank you to the staff of both schools and the students at both schools for making this a transition to be remembered positively, I think. So, yeah. And I hope you're hearing good comments and frank comments from parents. And if there's anything we can do as a board, I'm sure we would be more than happy to do that to help you in the future.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you for coming tonight to speak with us. We put in your lap an incredibly difficult endeavor, and it was not lost on me that it was in your first year of being a principal, not just the first year at Alexander, but first year being a principal, and you've just done a really wonderful job with it, and I love seeing everything that you're doing to create a community and culture, and especially adding the lightning bolt to Archie. I think that's a really nice touch. So thank you for everything you're doing and for coming to present to us tonight.
Thank you. It really has been a collaborative effort. Just lots and lots of brains at work here. So thank you.
Thank you so much. I do appreciate it. I look forward to my next visit because
Yeah.
it seems like there'll be a lot of new and exciting things you'll get to show me. But I do appreciate everything that not only you, but the rest of your team has done to make Alexander a school of excellence for all of our kids.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, I was just going to take a moment and acknowledge Reagan, too. Principal Bossett sitting in the audience. Reagan played a key role in that in the spring, and also had a very difficult situation on her hands. And so I want to thank her, too. And she's here for a different reason this evening, but at the same time, she's here and was a big part of that as well. So thank you to both Katie and Reagan for their assistance in that transition.
Thank you. Next up is community comment. I do not have any. Okay. We will move on to approval of tonight's agenda.
Move approval of the agenda for tonight.
Second.
Board Secretary Coburn, ready to vote?
Online voting is open.
I'm a yes.
Thank you, Director Abraham. All votes have been cast and the motion carries with all directors voting in favor.
Thank you. Before we get to tonight's consent agenda, did any directors have any questions or comments after reviewing the bills? Hearing none, are there any items that directors would like to pull from tonight's consent agenda? Hearing none, is there a motion to approve tonight's consent agenda?
I move we approve tonight's consent agenda.
Second.
Board Secretary Coburn, ready to vote?
Online voting is open. All votes have been cast and the motion carries with all directors voting in favor.
Thank you. Next, we move on to tonight's public hearings. We have 3, and I will turn it over to Vice President Abraham.
Now is the time and place for the public hearing on the proposed ICCSD 2425, 2526, and 2627 district calendars. The purpose of the public hearing is to receive public input on the district's proposed calendars. As part of a rolling 3-year calendar system, the board will approve the 25-26 district calendar and acknowledge the draft 26-27 and 27-28 district calendars at the November 12th, 2024 annual meeting. Are there any comments from the board? Are there any comments from the public?
Thank you. We will close the district calendar public hearing. Next up is the Wickham Elementary HVAC Replacement Project public hearing.
Now is the time and place for the public hearing on the proposed plans and specifications for the Wickham Elementary HVAC Replacement Project. The Board of Directors set the date for this public hearing on October 8th, 2024. Notice of public hearing was published in the Iowa City Press Citizen on October 9th, 2024. The district will receive bids on this project at 2 p.m. October 30th, 2024 at the Facilities Management Conference Center, 1137 South Riverside Drive, Iowa City, Iowa. Notice to contractors was published as required by law in multiple statewide plan rooms and on the Iowa City Community School District website on October 9th, 2024. Are there any questions from the board? Are there any questions from the public?
Okay, we will close that public hearing. Next up is the public hearing on Hills Elementary School demolition project.
Now is the time and place for the public hearing on the proposed plans and specifications for the Hills Elementary demolition project. The Board of Directors set the date for this public hearing on October 8th, 2024. Notice of public hearing was published in the Iowa City Press Citizen on October 9th, 2024. The district will receive bids on this project at 2 p.m. October 29th, 2024 at the Facilities Management Conference Center, 1137 South Riverside Drive, Iowa City, Iowa. Notice to contractors was published as required by law in multiple statewide plan rooms and on the Iowa City Community School District website on October 9th, 2024. Are there any questions from the board? Are there any questions from the public?
Hearing none, and I will close that public hearing. That takes us to tonight's policy review. We have the 300 Series Policy Administration and Policy 203 Board of Directors Conflict of Interest. Director Finch, did you want to start the comments or share with us what was discussed at Policy and Governance?
Sure, President Malone. The 300 series are not a lot of changes there, just some change of wordings and people responsible for duties. The policy 203 we brought back to committee today to add a clause to the conflict of interest policy whereby if a board member is wanting to apply for full-time staff employment, he or she must first resign from the board. And we borrowed that language from the Des Moines policies.
Any comments or questions from board members? Okay.
I'm going to talk about the conflict of interest policy. I can't support one that says that a board member has to resign if they want to apply for a position. And I'll give you a couple of reasons why. One, the folks that sit up here are very dedicated to education, and which is why they're here. And if they're seeking for a job in the district, they're wanting to do the best thing they can to help out. And so they don't want to quit a job and then not get a job in the district and not be able to still help, right? Like, we're all helpers up here. And so I think there's a risk there that I don't like. But a big primary thing is we're also very public up here, and having resigned from the board for a reason already, that then got back to my employer that I was potentially leaving my place of employment, put me in a very awkward spot. And you can't just resign from this board without people knowing about it. So I can't support making people resign from the board as they're trying to seek employment.
Thank you,
The rest of it's fine, and
Director
I guess I should say, if you want to have something in there that says something like, a board member doesn't get any special influence, or, you know, some language of that in terms of getting a position, I'm fine with that. But yeah, I can't support making them resign from the board.
Thank you, Director Eystone, for sharing that. Any other comments or questions? Okay.
I guess I'm not really sure what to say to that, because to me, it is just basic ethics as it relates to conflict of interest policy. Even our superintendent supported this policy at the committee meeting. And if you wanted to come to the committee meeting tonight to express your concerns so that maybe we could reword the policy, that would have been welcomed. And I would invite you to come to our committee in the future if you have questions about the things that we're discussing and deciding upon. But we had 4 members there tonight, and all 4 of us agreed that we thought this policy was a good idea.
Okay, I'm not trying to get you on the defensive here. I'm just telling you my feelings. I don't come to committee meetings that I'm not on the committee. That's my expectation for myself. It was on the agenda. I knew it was on the agenda, and I could say my piece, and I'm saying my piece. If everybody else supports it, everybody else supports it. But I'm going to say my
Oh,
piece, and
yeah.
this is the appropriate place to do that.
I'm not getting defensive. I'm just telling you how, what my feelings are about it.
Any other questions or comments? Okay, thank you. Next up is our discussion item for tonight, which is the equity update, and it's the HRS Level 1 walkthroughs. Superintendent Degner, did you want to?
Yeah, first I wanted to acknowledge our commenters from our last October meeting, and just in a public way respond that we're working to arrange a meeting with them this Friday, some board reps and some admin reps to continue that conversation. And so I think it's important to know that their voice was heard and that we see them and value them, and want to continue to look for ways to make sure that all are feeling included and valued in our community. And so we'll be meeting with them here, hopefully coming this Friday, and then we'll have some more report out of that work eventually. Tonight, Laura's going to talk to you, as President Malone said, about HRS Level 1 walkthroughs. And so this is an element of our HRS work that Laura's been an instrumental part of. So, Laura?
Hello, everyone. Good evening. Good evening, board. I'm going to talk to you a little bit about our HRS Level 1 walkthroughs. Just a quick, brief overview. So we all know that in order for students to be ready for rigor, they have to have a certain perceived amount of safety. And our HRS Level 1 supports that, as well as culturally responsive teaching, which is embedded within a lot of our teaching practices. So that's really the crux of why we're doing these walkthroughs. Here's our main objectives, and it's kind of small, so I'll just read them. But we want to be able to identify examples of those when we go into buildings, examples of what safe, supportive, and collaborative might look like. We want to be able to share the tool that we use with building administration so that they can then have their teacher teams use them for like similar types of walkthroughs. And then just to really support building administration in their wanting their buildings to remain Level 1 certified, Level 1, so all of our buildings are Level 1 certified, but we want to, a part of Level 1 certification is continuing to work at it. And so this will help our buildings with that as well. There are 6 focus areas this year, and that's building safety, welcoming entry, inclusive environments like windows and mirrors, common area expectations, district-wide initiatives, classroom management, and behavior management. And so there's lots of things kind of lumped in classroom management and behavior management, such as like our expectations for PBIS, our expectations for SEL, psychologically safe spaces, how we're talking to students, the tone that's used, those sorts of things. And thus far, we've been to 3 buildings. We plan to go to all of our buildings, and we should be done by the end of April 2025. Just a quick look at the rubric that we're utilizing. Here is so tiny, so I'll just explain it. But the thing is, there's several of us on the team. It's the equity department, and then whoever comes with us, and I'll explain this too in a little bit, who's invited, but we all have our own individual rubrics. Some use their tablets, some use paper form, but we go through with a rubric that breaks things down from innovating, applying, developing, in those 6 categories. And so here you can see safety of the building and then welcoming entry. And so just for an example, one of the components of welcoming entry is front office staff greet and welcome all with a smile and a positive tone of voice. And so as soon as we're in that building, that's something we can see. Something for safety of the building. All access points leading to the outside are controlled. And that's really tricky in our mornings, as students are coming in, but we still are able to kind of capture whether or not that's pretty controlled, or whether or not, it seems like there's no process there or everything's open. And so those are just things that we think are super great feedback for our buildings, and for them to start to look at themselves, which is why them having the tool will be great beyond our visit. So a few changes from last year, because I don't know if you remember, but we did this last year. Mm-hmm. This year I'm excited because there were more voices included on the final rubric, including some of our teaching and learning directors, as well as our HRS lead team members. We also have a more comprehensive rubric that covers more of HRS. Last year it was more so focused on 1.2, which is really about psychological safety. So more of the PBIS, if restorative practices are used, whether or not students see examples of themselves around the room in the curriculum solely, whereas we were able to find ways to expand it, which is really tricky, to things like the building safety. So it now covers 1.1 and 1.6 in addition to just 1.2. The rubric is more streamlined, so it's more compact, which makes it more conducive for walking around with, which is nice. And district level staff and administration, building administration are invited to join us, are encouraged to join us on these walkthroughs, which is a change from last year. Here is a sample of some feedback that a school might receive. And so I'll just, there's a little disclaimer there acknowledging that our visit is between 25 and 30 minutes. It's a snapshot. We won't be able to see everything, and we just acknowledge that. And then we go into we enjoyed our time, and I just put ESC Middle School. Doesn't exist. But, talking about the engagement, explaining what we evidenced, what we saw, what we witnessed. And then, we might give and this one's shout out to the kindergarten teacher who asked students questions in English and Spanish. We noticed the uptick in your Spanish-speaking population. But then also, we say windows and mirrors is an area that could use a little more attention, as well as safety of the building and welcoming entry. And so it's there. They don't get a whole bunch of notes from each and every person who went in to do the observation. They actually get one overall for the building. And then there's some suggestions for next step, which we encourage the principals to share with their admin teams and also those teacher teams so that they can look at areas that need a little growth and then start to do peer observations. So this is different from our instructional rounds, which are happening in HRS level 2, but we still want people to keep updated and keep HRS level 1 at the forefront, because that safety part is so important when we want students ready for rigor. That is my part. Any questions?
One thing I'll just add on to what Laura shared, because we had met with you guys in Ed Committee about instructional rounds. And so just to, again, clarify the difference, these are about level 1, and knowing that our instructional rounds were about that next stage of the work in the high reliability schools framework. And so it was clear from her presentation here about what they're looking for there. And then hopefully you can differentiate that between what the instructional rounds were with the teachers going through with the principal. So we have 2 different kinds of walkthroughs going on. I know a couple of you asked me questions about that, so just wanted to clarify that as well. But thank you to Laura, and if you have any questions, I'm sure she's happy to answer them.
Director Eastham, I saw you with your mic.
Thank you, President Malone. Laura, I'm really blown away by how you're conducting this work. I'm looking at a phrase in your walk-through feedback summary disclaimer, which says that your intentions are to assist staff in this various aspects. And to me, that denotes an approach to this whole scheme of things that we're undergoing here, which will assist us greatly in achieving the things that we want students to see and observe over the coming months and years. So I really appreciate your efforts here, your whole team effort, and your approach to the whole enterprise.
Thank you. These are definitely non-evaluative and meant to support. Thank you.
I just want to comment, I think it's great work, of course, and I appreciate that you're paying attention still to the level 1, because you might think level 1, okay, check, and move on. And that level 1 is so foundational, and so I really appreciate your work in this.
Thank you.
I guess I will close out comments, Executive Director Cottrell, by saying it was great to see one of these in action just by happenstance. I was at a building where you all were conducting one last year, and I will have to admit that, believe it or not, I did not even see them in the room until, that's how unintrusive they are, that until one of them said, "Oh, hi, Ruthina," I was like, wait, what? They just blended in with the class. So I know how hard your team works to make sure that it's not disrupting classroom time, and I appreciate the amount of time and effort that you all are putting in it. So thank you.
It's definitely
so
a collaborative effort. Thank you
Yes.
so much. Thank you.
Thank you. And that takes us to tonight's presentations. First up, we have our budget workshop.
Yeah, and Adam's going to deliver that for us this evening. We thought it just might be helpful to do some budget basics a little bit for not only the board, but also our community, as we've had more recently tougher or more difficult budget conversations. But the good news that we're excited to report a little bit to you this evening is that situations drastically changed, really since the beginning of September. Adam's probably getting nervous that I'm using the words drastically changed. But at the same time, our situation is in a much different spot. And that's for a couple different factors. One is from the certification of our annual report and seeing the success of the reductions we made over the last couple years that were more successful than we anticipated. And then also the big one is our certified enrollment, that we've gained 170 students as of October. And so that is a extremely positive number for us. And so we're in a much better position than some of those more recent conversations we've been having in regards to the budget. So with that, I'm going to let Adam talk to you a little bit here about some of those fundamental elements of our budget, and then we'll have an opportunity for questions at the end.
All right, appreciate that. As was shared, definitely a changing financial situation. One of the things with school finance is that circumstances can change. I think every single time I've presented about the budget, and it probably sounds like a broken record, I always share, there are these factors that we're constantly monitoring that can change over time. The two really big ones are enrollment and SSA. I'm going to circle back and talk about that more in a little while here. But what I really wanted to start out with, and again, for the benefit of the board as a kind of regular reminder, and then also for the benefit of the community, is a quick overview of school finance in Iowa. And for better and for worse, in some cases, school finance in Iowa does not look similar to school finance in most states. If you're familiar with school funding in most states, you might think about a school board can go out to the community each year to levy additional general fund dollars. If you have really high property tax values, that's likely going to result in higher expenditures per student. And many people assume that that's the way it is in Iowa because that's the way it is in most states around the country. In reality, though, the state exercises a great deal of control over our budget and our spending authority. And in doing so, creates two situations. On one hand, creates a situation of greater equity within the state of Iowa than what you see in most states across the country. So when you look at the spending per pupil in the highest spending districts and the lowest spending districts in Iowa, the difference is measured in hundreds of dollars in most cases, as opposed to the thousands or even tens of thousands that you see in other states. So certainly our system contributes to greater equity. On the flip side, though, our system also constrains us. It means that we are heavily reliant, almost completely reliant, on the state legislature to determine what our financial resources will be for each school year. And so that's something where, as a district, we have very few cases where we have discretion. And so with that, I want to turn to this, this slide that shows our funds kind of in terms of these buckets. And one of the reasons that we use the buckets is that each one has its own purpose. And you can almost think about, each one of these contains a different flavor of whatever is inside the bucket, right? And for the most part, you don't want to combine those flavors. For the most part, you don't want to, and for the most part, we can't. So looking at the different buckets, we have a couple that I want to draw your attention to in particular. One of them is the general fund. This is the bucket on the left. And if we were to draw these proportionately, this is the biggest of all of our buckets, right? So each year for the Iowa City Community School District, that general fund bucket is roughly $200 million of revenue, $200 million of expenditures. So as we look at the general fund, that's what drives our primary programming. We pay teachers, we pay other staff out of the general fund. That comprises about 86% of what we spend in general fund dollars is going to the people within our system. And then the remainder of that is going directly to support our instructional program. So as we look at things like, transportation of students to school on school buses, for example. That's something that is primarily coming out of general fund. Certainly funding of certain programs, special education, for example, English language learner programming, those are things that are coming out of the general fund. So the general fund is when we talk about spending authority, and over the past year and a half when we've talked about budget reductions, we're primarily talking about that general fund. I'll get into a little bit more about that in a second, but I do want to talk about a few of the other buckets. And one of the big ones I want to highlight is actually the fourth bucket, this capital projects fund. So when we talk about capital projects, we're primarily talking right now about two funding sources. One of them is SAVE, which is the former 1% sales tax. It used to be something that voters could choose to levy. Now it's made statewide because everybody was using it. So we receive some sales tax revenue that's distributed by the state on a per pupil basis. And then also PEPL, which is the physical plant and equipment levy. And that's something that is levied locally. So that's a board decision up to a point, and then it goes to the voters. We took ours to the voters a couple of years ago, and it's authorized through 2035. Both of those raise money that can be used for capital expenses. So talking about capital expenses, it's things like building a building, renovating a building, purchasing a vehicle, purchasing certain technology equipment. There are very few areas where we can spend those dollars, and it's almost entirely tied to purchasing some physical asset, a piece of equipment, a building, whatever the case may be. In almost every case, we cannot use capital projects money for personnel expenditures. So for example, a couple of years ago, or I shouldn't say a couple, this was back in 2017 when we passed the general obligation bond, that raised, in the ballpark of $200 million for the district. But at the same time, basically none of that could go to people, right? That was all for completion of the facilities master plan and projects that were associated with construction equipment. So the two biggest buckets on this slide are the general fund, as I said, and the capital projects fund. The capital projects fund is one that can be influenced by the district. We can increase those revenues in the form of passing the PEPL levy, which we've already done, in the form of seeking a general obligation bond, going out to voters and saying, hey, there are projects we want to do. Would you support us raising money to do those? So that bucket, we have some control over the size. We don't control our SAVE revenues. That's determined by the state. And we can't raise our PEPL levy any higher than it is. But we do have some control over that one. The general fund, we have almost no control over in terms of the revenue, the size of the bucket, right? And so that's determined by the state. The state establishes a supplemental state aid rate, and that's going to tell us per student how much we're going to have within that bucket. So once we get our certified enrollment, that helps to complete the picture for the following year of what our budget resources are going to be. The other item we still are waiting on for next year, for example, is what that SSA rate will be. I'll talk in a little bit about how those work together. I want to talk about a few of these other funds just so that there's an awareness of, we have to be careful about where we spend money, and we have to be mindful of how we're raising money for each of these buckets. So the management fund is one that's tied to risk. This is one that doesn't have a state-defined limit. It's really limited by what we need, and it primarily pays for insurance products. This isn't insurance for people. This is paying for liability insurance on the part of the district. It's paying for hardware break-fix insurance, cybersecurity liability insurance, and other costs associated with that. There are a handful of other areas, for example, early retirement programs that we can pay out of the management fund as well. And so some people have asked, when we're in budget reductions, we talk about early retirement programs. We're going to incent people to retire. How does that save us money if we're paying out, their salary or portion of it when they retire? The way that it saves us money is that our budget reduction, we're talking about the general fund, we can pay those early retirement benefits out of the management fund. Student activity fund is largely what it sounds like. This funds our student activities within the district. This is something where most of the funds coming into the activity fund are raised. They're raised through ticket sales, they're raised through fundraisers. They may be raised for specific activities, they may be more general in nature, but they're going right back to pay for the things that the money was raised for. So they're paying for transportation of students to events. They're paying for athletic equipment, they're paying for other activity equipment, paying for musical instruments, paying for things like that that are associated with delivery of our student activities programming. And then there are certain other student activity costs that pays for, especially at the elementary level as well, where it starts to get into some other programming that's available for our students. Debt service, again, really what it sounds like. So when we pass a general obligation bond, we levy to pay that. We went out to the voters, we asked if they approved it, they did. And then each year we levy in the debt service fund what it's going to take to pay off our bond obligations for that year. So that's a fund that really is just designed to pay off general obligation bonds. Nutrition fund, again, what it sounds like, this is a separate fund. It funds our nutrition staff. This is one of the few cases where we can pay people outside the general fund. So our nutrition program staff are paid from the nutrition fund. We also raise money directly tied to the nutrition fund. So that would include lunch sales, breakfast sales, a la carte sales, and then also the biggest portion of that is actually federal funding. So funding that comes into us for free reduced lunch program delivery, free breakfast program delivery, other revenues tied to use of local foods, for examples, are all things that we pull into that nutrition fund. And that's a fund that we've really been pretty close to balanced each year for the past several years. But again, one that we can't transfer money from that to the general fund. And in general, if something's eligible to be paid out of the nutrition fund, we're already paying it out of that. And then we have a handful of internal service funds. So this would be things like funds for our self-funded employee health and dental insurance programs, where the district pays into this from the general fund. And then we use these internal service funds to pay premiums that we owe, other costs associated with delivery of those insurance products. So went into some detail there. One of the things that I want to highlight, though, again, is just returning to the concept that some of these we have limited control over how big the bucket is, like capital projects by seeking a GO bond. Some of them we have a lot of control over how big they are, like the management fund, but very limited ability to spend that money on anything other than clearly defined purposes. And then the general fund, which can be spent on almost all expenses the district would incur. We have really very limited control over the size of that. And to the extent that we have control, we're already exercising that to increase that bucket to be as large as possible. An example of that was at the last meeting where you approved the instructional support levy resolution. That's one that increases that general fund bucket size, and it's something that we do as a regular procedure. So the next slide just goes into a little bit more detail. I'm not going to focus a lot on this, a little bit more detail about some of the things that I just shared. I do want to highlight a little bit, though, this third slide. And what this is showing are some categorical funds within the general fund. So one of the other challenges that we face is we have this general fund bucket, and I just said that it, for the most part, can be spent on anything we choose. Vast majority is going to go to people. But we do have some limits even within that bucket of funding. So I listed a few here. There are actually dozens of these, but I tried to highlight a few. So for example, I called out the homeschool assistance program is something where we get specific funding from the state that goes into the general fund bucket, but can only be used primarily for homeschool assistance programming. In recent years, the state has given us some flexibility to use certain categorical funds. Homeschool assistance program is one, teacher quality, the third column there, professional development funds, teacher leadership and compensation, the fourth column there. The state has given us some flexibility to use unused amounts at the end of the year for other general fund purposes. And again, just to highlight how the district has approached trying to maximize use of our resources, our first priority is delivering these programs as we are supposed to, and that's a requirement of the state. We have to ensure that we are providing an adequate homeschool assistance program, that we're providing for our teacher professional learning needs. But in cases where we've had excess funds, and last spring the board approved a flex transfer out of the homeschool assistance program, we look to move those dollars back into the regular unrestricted general fund. The reason that we had those dollars was COVID. We had a massive surge in enrollment in the homeschool assistance program that was short-lived, and then it dropped, and we had this funding that we didn't have necessarily a need for. So when the state passed the law that allowed for those flexibility transfers, again, that's something we leverage, really, to try to use these categorical funds for their primary purpose first, but then where that's already addressed, let's look at how we can utilize these to improve our general fund budget situation. So this next slide starts to get into a concept I mentioned a little bit earlier, which is unspent authorized budget. So this is something that's important for people to understand. I mentioned that the size of that general fund bucket is really determined by the state on a per pupil basis. Every year, the state sets an SSA rate, supplemental state aid, which is usually a percentage, 2.5%, 1%, 3%, 0%. And that is the amount that our authority grows from the previous year to the next year. That's how much our authority grows in terms of what we are allowed to spend. So it doesn't matter how much cash we have sitting in a bank account. All that matters is what the state has authorized us to spend. And so each year we start with a certain amount of unspent authorized budget. That amount carries over to the following year. And essentially what we look at is what was our carryover into this year? What's the state's calculation of what we're allowed to spend? And that's what we're allowed to spend. At the end of the year, whatever is left is our unspent authorized budget. The state generally recommends that this amount is above 10%. Our board has set, and I think this is appropriate for a larger district, our board has set a target of 5 to 10% for unspent authorized budget purposes. What this slide shows, and I want to throw in a caveat, as I always do, that this is dependent upon a number of factors, including SSA rate, as is spelled out here, but also on some updates to our budget forecast model to reflect recent legislative changes, for example, flow through of AEA dollars and what impact that's going to have. And so as we work, especially actually tomorrow when I have a budget workshop in Des Moines to go over exactly this, but as we work through the coming weeks, I think this will become a little bit more clear. But when I plug our current numbers with our current enrollment, which as Matt mentioned, we're up 173 students, and that's fantastic. But when I plug our numbers in, what I'm showing you here are the trajectories of our unspent authorized budget depending upon that SSA rate established by the state. So in year one, you can see that we are all in the same place, and that makes sense because we already know what the SSA rate is for this year. So that's set. So at the end of this year, right now, I would project that we'll end up $4.3 million positive, which is about 2% of our budget, keeping in mind our target is 5 to 10. The chart up above, and it's color-coded. I have no idea what the colors are because I can't tell color, but the chart above has color-coded by SSA rate what those trajectories are. And as you can see, if we were to get 2.5% SSA every year for the next 5 years, we would end this 5-year period projected right now just over $20 million unspent. And that would be over roughly, it'd be actually right around the high end of our target range, which is that 5 to 10%. Certainly, as you see that amount drop, if we go down to the 2, we end the period just a little bit, probably about 11.5 million, it looks like. So still substantially positive, but substantially less. So you can see the cumulative impact of those SSA rates over time. And then down and down, and at the bottom, if we got 0% each year, which I don't want to alarm anybody, I don't expect that will happen, but we would finish the period closer to negative $15 million. So let's hope that's not the case. I did include a black dotted line here. And that is what I would call a rough current projection. And I highlighted what my numbers were down in the table below the chart. And so as you look at the SSA forecast, this is me looking at what I expect based upon state revenues. So recently, the state's revenue estimating conference came out and showed that they expect revenues the current year to be lower than previously projected, the following year even lower than that, the following year even lower than that. And that's largely tied to the tax cuts that were implemented at the state level. And when I look at that and I look at the state of Iowa's finances, my assumption has to be, from a conservative standpoint, that that's going to result in lower SSA rates. So again, these are not thoroughly informed. I will meet tomorrow with some of the folks who do work closely with the governor's office and the legislature to get better percentages. But when I look at this, if I plug in 2% for FY26, 1% for 27, 28, and then 0.5 for FY29, you can see what that would do with that dotted black line right in the middle. And so again, then I have the numbers spelled out down below where we go from 4.3 all the way up to 9.8 in FY27. But that's when, because we still assume some expenditure growth, we're still assuming at this point, because we don't have our enrollment projections yet, flat enrollment basically. And so based upon that, we would be all the way back down to 1.9 million at the end of this 5-year period. So what I wanted to highlight here is momentary good news is great because it's cumulative and we build upon it, but at the same time, it's critical that we monitor these other factors moving forward. The last slide that I wanted to highlight is it's either a sink or a bathtub, I'm not sure. But what it's designed to show is the 2 primary inputs and then the 1 primary output as it relates to our general fund budget and how this impacts that unspent authorized budget each year. And so looking at this bathtub, we have a water level. We have 2 faucets. One of them is the supplemental state aid percent. So that might be 2.5, let's say. The other one is our enrollment growth percentage, which this year is just a little bit over 1%, okay? So those things add up to 4. If we can keep our percentage of increase in general fund expenditures below 4%, let's say we got 2.5% SSA, that's a big assumption, but let's say we did. If we can keep our percentage increase in expenditures below 4, the water level is going to rise. That carries over to the following year. Basically, that's indicating a surplus situation. It's going to add to our unspent authorized budget. It's going to carry over to the following year. So our starting point is now higher. And then we fill the bathtub again, we drain from the bathtub again, we see where we end up. It does not matter, and this is simplified, I will say that. This is a little bit oversimplified. There are other factors like federal funds that come into play. But it fundamentally doesn't matter whether the water is coming out of the supplemental state aid faucet or whether it's coming out of the enrollment growth faucet. If we have 3% enrollment growth and 0% SSA, that's fundamentally the same thing. I'd rather have that actually, but for other reasons. But that's fundamentally the same thing as having 1.5 and 1.5. So it's the sum of those 2 things that's really determining where we are relative to our percentage increase in expenditures. When I budget, I'm generally budgeting for a 2.35 to 2.75% increase in expenditures. That's what we've historically had when you look at, a weighted average over a period of time. And so obviously, certainly trying to take into account anything that we know about inflation, increase in personnel costs, things like that. But that's kind of the range that generally we're looking at year to year going down that drain. So that's what we need to equal in order to at least keep the water level at the same point and hopefully raise it over time. So with that, I will pause for any questions.
Directors, any questions, comments? Director Lingo? Go for it.
I'll start us off then. First, the instructional levy that you commented on before, we are asking for the maximum on that, correct?
That is correct, yep.
And again, if the community was not to pass that, how much money would that take out of our did you say 8 million before, 8 to 10, somewhere in
Yeah,
there?
so because it's board approved, there's a 28-day period during which we can receive a petition that would force an election. We have not received that, at least to my knowledge. And so it wouldn't need to be passed by the public. If it were, and if it did not pass, the hit would be in the ballpark of 8 to 9 million, depending on where exactly it would end up next year. So it would be roughly $8.5 million.
And one thing I wanted to reiterate, that new buildings, additions to buildings, renovations to buildings, that money has to come from SAVE and PEPAL, and we cannot spend that money on the classroom.
Absolutely correct. We have no ability to transfer money out of our capital projects funds. And so once we have money in the capital projects funds, it can only be spent on building projects, equipment, things like that. It cannot be spent on personnel. And then similarly, we do not spend general fund money on capital eligible expenditures in any circumstance where we can avoid it.
Okay. Part of the reason I bring that up is there's been commentary online about what we're doing for buildings and things like that. There always is, but to reiterate that the money that is going to
Correct.
build onto any of our buildings cannot be used for classrooms that we build.
Yes. And sorry, the other thing I would share is land acquisitions as well are also a capital cost. So if we acquire land, that is money that could not be spent for general fund purposes.
Adam, could you, or Director Kurth, could you go to the slide with the, was it a toilet bowl or a sink? I don't know. It kind of looks like a toilet bowl to me, but I fixed one last week, so that's part of my brain. So one of the primary inputs you said is enrollment growth on there. And one of the things that I said that's at the last meeting that I kind of want to reiterate at this meeting is that housing policy is school policy. Okay? So when we hear, especially us at the board and people in the community, we're talking about housing developments, whether it's putting in high-density housing, low-density housing, single-family housing, any sort of housing, that has a profound effect on how we grow as a school district. And it's something that comes to me time and time again, especially when we're talking about some of these smaller school buildings where we need more students, right? Especially if we're trying to get the economies of scale across all of our buildings in the school district. And I'll continue to talk about Alexander, still sitting in a cornfield, right? And I don't think that anybody on the school board, when they approved that, and I've talked to some of them, expected that there'd still be a cornfield surrounding Alexander. And when I think about the way that we could shift students in the district, move them around, figure out our boundaries to make buildings more efficient, I just want to reiterate that a lot of it comes down to housing policy that we don't have control over. And it's something that I talk to city council members about throughout our 5 entities. But again, I just want to reiterate that point that if we have enrollment growth, especially as housing gets built out, when I see housing getting built out in Clear Creek, Amana, those are students, if that housing was built on our side of, 218? Or what's the dividing street up there? It's not 218. 965.
Yep.
But if it's a build on our side of 965, that is potentially students for our school district to grow with, which means more money for our school district, which means that we can better serve our students, our communities, and help keep the building structure as we have right now. So that's my soapbox for a moment.
Thank you, Director Lingo.
I'd like to engage in some conversation with Mitch about what he's just pointed out. I served for a long time on the Iowa City Planning and Zoning Commission. So my experience is that cities have zoning control over development, but they don't have actual control over the pace of the development or even if it occurs or not. The state has a lot of control over supplemental state aid, and they could easily, the state could easily address many of the financial problems school districts are having across the state by using general tax revenues to assist in educating students. I'm disinclined to accept the notion that this district or any other district in the state has to rely upon increasing the number of kids coming to the district all the time in order to meet our financial expectations and needs. The other thing that I think this presentation and Adam's continued efforts to try to get me to understand school financing, which have so far failed. These efforts indicate, this presentation indicates that the financing is a complex matter, but I think it also, in my mind anyway, is showing that our approach to school financing in this district is about the best we can do under the current state regulatory system and our local countywide or district-wide change in population and change in growth. So I appreciate your work, Adam, and the team's work in both understanding what we can do, doing the best we can at obtaining every revenue dollar that we're entitled to, and being very careful in how we expend our funds. We have, I think, as a board, I think we're still in this position. We've said that we are not going to reduce programs, or we're not going to resort to staff layoffs to address budgetary problems, if it's at all possible to avoid those two things. So thanks, Adam, for helping us to see what you see much more clearly than I do.
Thanks, Director Kurth. It's a very informative presentation. I think a lot of people in the community will appreciate everything that you've laid out for us tonight. Looking at your SSA forecast, these percentages are quite abysmal. How accurate do you think that this, have we gotten feedback from the UEN and from IASB on this? Is this what we're looking at in the future?
So as I mentioned briefly, I do have a meeting in Des Moines tomorrow, and it will be led by one of the individuals who runs Iowa School Finance Information Services, who has a close connection to the UEN, close connection to legislators in the governor's office, and I'm hoping to get a formal forecast of SSA at that point. I've already talked to individuals at Iowa School Finance and at the UEN in terms of what the expectations are, and for better or for worse, I think that these align with what those expectations are, which is really diminishing supplemental state aid rates over the coming 5 years. Now, I've been surprised before. I think all of us involved in schools who are closely monitoring this have been sometimes surprised by expecting a low SSA, and there's an early commitment on the part of either the governor, the legislature, or both to something higher. So certainly, hopefully that's the case. Hopefully I'll get some information along those lines tomorrow. But at the same time, with the state's revenues in sharp decline right now, like I said, this is my best guess as of today.
Can you remind me where revenue from property sales or any capital sale goes to?
Yes, so when we sell property of any type by law, the revenues from that sale have to go back to the funding source that paid for that property initially. The only time there's an exception is if you sell something very old where it's very difficult to show what that was purchased out of. But for example, if we sold a building, we would be looking at identifying where that building was paid from, and then that's where the funds would go. So they would not go to the general fund in general. They would go to the capital funds.
Thank you.
One thing, to comment on Director Finch's question and Mr. Kurth's presentation here and the percentages, one thing that we should consider when we look at those percentages is the build out of the voucher program in Iowa, because that will provide, I think they had 30,000 applications this summer for the school year, which would amount to an increase of $234 million in spending. And some of those students may have gone to public schools, but a lot of them that are going to start going in, especially when it becomes universal next year, anybody, no matter what income your level, can apply for one and get one. That it becomes a competing interest, and that is what, if you pay attention to podcasts out there, especially on education policy, but a lot of the issue that Arizona is having with their state's budget is stemming from the universal voucher program there. So, I mean, it's highly likely that it will become a larger issue here.
Thank you so much, CFO Kurth, for the presentation. You simplified it enough that I think anyone could follow it. I just had one, I know the answer to it, but I think it's important for us to put it on record. When you list out the unspent authorized balance projection, you know, if I wasn't on this side of the table and I'm looking like, okay, you all are projecting 4.3, 8.5, 1 year 9.8 million. Well, you know, if that was my savings account and instead of selling my house or moving into an RV, I would probably dip into that. Why don't we dip into that? Because I know what some of the rules are and what our policy states, but why don't we just spend it down to 500,000?
Yeah, that's a fantastic question, and we only have to look to very recent history to see a clear answer to that, and looking to the impact of the COVID pandemic. So prior to COVID, we really we budgeted for enrollment growth of 100 students a year, 150 students per year, and we had seen that for years. We also, you know, over time have come to count on an SSA percentage, which ever since 2009 or so has been too low. But prior to that, we would get 4% or more every single year. And so when you have those expectations and you start to count on those, the problem with the expectations is that they can be undermined like that. And so looking at the impact of the COVID pandemic, where we went from being up 100 to 150 students a year to suddenly dropping by hundreds of students, that is a massive budget impact. So again, looking at my bathtub image, if suddenly the enrollment growth is negative 2% for a year, which may be unpredictable, it may be the result of significant layoffs in the community, it may be the result of something like the pandemic that we have no way to predict, that's a huge impact to our budget, and we won't necessarily know it until it's already so late that it's tough to plan for. Same with SSA. If we're budgeting for 2% SSA, but then something happens in the legislative session in April, and suddenly that percentage is zero, that's a massive hit to our budget. And so when we look at 0% versus 2%, that's a $4 million swing for us. When we look at negative 2% versus 1% enrollment, that's a $6 million swing for us. If both of those happen in the same year, that's a $10 million swing. And so ultimately, that's why it's so critical that we try to build up that 5 to 10% cushion within our unspent balance, so that when the unexpected happens, it doesn't result in massive immediate cuts. And instead, even when we have those setbacks, we can work through a process, much like we did, you know, over the past year and a half, to try to make reductions in ways that have as little impact on our program delivery and on our students as possible.
Thank you. That takes us to tonight's other presentation, which is our instructional utilization of Center for Innovation. And Superintendent Degner, are you starting us off?
I'm going to try. The hardest thing is probably going to be getting the slide deck up here. Is there a different way I want to show this? All right. Good evening again, everybody. As superintendent, part of my job is to provide updates about what my team's working on. And tonight we get to tell you about the Center for Innovation, which is an ongoing project that will offer innovative opportunities for students, teachers, and the communities and draw more families to the ICCSD. Make no mistake, the ICCSD is already on the path to excellence. Our teachers are the best in the state, constantly refreshing their teaching strategies to meet the learning demands of our students, who are informed by technology, social media, and global experiences in ways that people before the year 2000 could not have imagined. The district also benefits unquantifiably from sharing a community with the University of Iowa, which continues to create an intellectual and cultural oasis despite threats to public education funding. Even though we have so much going for us, as the last presentation made clear, enrollment is the key to our district's financial health. The opportunities at the Center for Innovation will positively impact our enrollment. So tonight, we really have three major chunks to the presentation here for you. We're going to talk a little bit about progress to date, our Center for Center for Innovation leadership team's work, our pathway progress, and finally, we're going to end with our partners from Junior Achievement, talking to us a little bit about that collaboration and partnership and plans for the future. But before I turn this over to our leadership team, I think a brief bit of history on this project will be helpful. When we started the FMP 2.0 planning process in 2021, we identified the need for a multi-purpose educational facility that develops our students' portrait of the graduate competencies. And you can think about competencies like skills. We said that these 6 pieces of adaptability, empathy, communication, global citizenship, critical thinking, and learner's mindset were important for our students to have when they left us in K-12 education. In June 2022, we purchased the Tyler building from ACT. The building, which was in excellent condition, had the general configuration we were looking for in the Center for Innovation. In November 2022, the board approved our first improvements to the Center for Innovation, which included improvements to the second floor of the building to host our online program, teacher leadership and compensation program, special education team, and create a larger professional development space. In 2023, changes were made to the Iowa Code that required the district to construct a storm shelter before any daily student programming could occur. Because this construction project would need to be designed, bidded, and built out, we had to delay the use of the facility for student programming. In the spring of 2023, I brought in Trace Pickering, the co-founder and executive director of Iowa Big, a project-based learning center in Cedar Rapids, to facilitate discussions with community employers and entrepreneurs and collect feedback about what skills we should continue to develop and make our students more career and life ready. Trace presented his results to the board in August of 2023. In September of 2023, the CFI leadership team began its search for student programming opportunities based on his feedback. Unfortunately, that same month, we received unprecedented low enrollment numbers and projections, began to experience the impact of vouchers, and discovered a budget coding issue. As a result of our budget challenges, the CFI leadership team tweaked their search to find programming opportunities requiring minimal investment in teacher FTE or full-time employment in teachers that would need to serve at the Center for Innovation. In other words, we started to explore programming that did not take those resources away from our classrooms. While the storm shelter delayed student programming, we considered ways to maximize the CFI's use while preserving district resources. In February, the board approved an updated design, including the storm shelter, 2 classrooms, and a complete build-out of the top floor office and board space. Construction on that project began in July. I want to clarify that we had not planned for the admin build-out to precede the student experience project, but under the circumstances, this is what made the most sense. So while we will continue to hear, while you'll continue to hear about the work moving forward tonight, the CFI is currently being used again for the teacher leadership program, our special education team, our online program, district technology, and district professional development space. We also are hosting several student experiences at the Center for Innovation, including Junior Achievement's BizTown, art shows, Literacy Day, and the College and Career Fair. So at this time, I'm going to transition to Reagan Bosette. Reagan's our assistant principal at North Central Middle School, and the facilitator of our CFI leadership team. This evening, she's going to tell you about some of our work and future opportunities at the Center for Innovation. Go ahead. Just scroll. Yeah, you just scroll down or use the arrow.
Good evening, board. I always think I'm going to be completely calm and collected when I get here, and then as soon as I get up here, and there's not even that many people, and I get nervous. Thank you for allowing me the time tonight to come and just share with you our work from the CFI leadership team, but also just be a speaker and speak on behalf of like a room full of brilliant people that has been working and brainstorming for the district. My goal is just to share, like Matt said, an overview of our work from last year, some of the outcomes that came from that work, and then also what our major goals are for this year, and what we already have kind of in action. This is going to be the hardest part. As Matt shared, the roots of the work kind of began with our Portrait of a Graduate, and that product that was created through all of that work allows us to have purpose for what we create. It gives us a framework and a lens to look through when we design and choose programming that goes into that building. I think that's something really important to keep in mind, that we have a goal for what we want students to leave here with, and the CFI can really benefit towards those goals. I think the innovation team can be summed up. Our goal this year is really dreaming up now what for ICCSD. As with any new venture, we knew it was really important to kind of quantify what our work would be, what it was going to look like. And that meant maybe identifying where we're already innovating in the district, explore and learn innovation around the state and country, and then map our assets and resources that we have right here that Matt alluded to. Spoiler alert, there's already a great deal of awesomeness going on in ICCSD. So when we look to what's already being done that's innovation, and examples of greatness, they're all around. These are just a couple that came up and were right in front of mind, is our CASTLE program, our BPA groups at the high school, Empathy Rockets, Maker Spaces, our nests that have gone into our middle schools and high school areas. So all of these things are awesome examples. And what we really want to do is look at those and what's working, and then magnify and amplify those things. The qualities that make those great, like being student-centered and really rich with critical thinking, is what we want to keep in mind for the CFI. The next thing that we really worked on last year was learning from innovative models that are going on around the state and around the country. We had team members be able to explore this. We looked at One Stone in Idaho. We traveled to District 214 in Chicago, Village High School in Colorado Springs, and then we obviously have a couple really close. Waterloo has, I think, a central campus or a career tech ed building, and so does Des Moines. So really close to home, too, is some innovation leaders right around us. I'm really going to struggle with that. As far as Iowa City goes, it's really obvious that we have a ton of resources to connect to, and I think those resources give us relevance to projects that we design, projects that we create, and programming. So when we looked at our area, we just created an asset map, basically, of currently who we're partnering with and how we're partnering with them, what are they, what the relationship looks like, but then also what it can continue to look like and how we can grow those partnerships. Maybe how those partnerships can be innovative in and of themselves, and look a different way, so that we can create some really neat programming for our students. And these are just a couple partners that came to mind pretty quickly. Again, we will be working a little bit more on what can change about these partnership models as well to benefit our students. So the outcomes from last year, obviously, some had been in the works prior to this. So I know the Wright House of Fashion and the Poor Farm had already been in the works. So the CFI leadership team isn't responsible for those two things, but definitely from this type of work, these things are born. We really narrowed down to 3 things that we think is going to move ICCSD, or continue to move us forward and remain a leader in education, which is career pathways, our project-based and immersive learning experiences that we provide, and also some innovation incubators, which is hopefully going to help make innovation the norm for ICCSD. I think that The other biggest thing was not only did our middle school electives come from that, but we really focused on when we bring students to the CFI, what are we immersing them in that also allows their teachers and the staff that gets to be a part of it to learn as well. So we want that immersive learning to be for everyone that gets to come. This year, our goal is focus on production. As we know, time is money. And so we want to make sure that we're producing something that we can be proud of and that shows that we're actually creating something in those meetings. I think sometimes innovative minds can circle the wheel and never get back to the point. But we're going to focus on production this year. Our biggest goals are developing a student immersive learning experience. I know that seems just like hype, but really we want to create a 2 or 3 day experience for, we're not sure what grade level yet, to come to the CFI and experience authentic learning. We want to create, this is kind of one that's just been bubbling at the surface, is create some type of extended learning series, maybe an Iowa City Talks. That name is up for grabs. I think we're still thinking of a better one, but kind of an Iowa City Talks platform to share passions across the board with all of our stakeholders. So that would be open to students, staff, community. We want to expand those student opportunities that are hosted at the CFI already, and then continue our student pathways. When we speak to that student immersive learning experience, that is going to be, like I said, a 2 to 3 day interdisciplinary, multi-building experience. So we'll bring kids from different buildings. We really want to run some small pilot groups this year, though. Hopefully in the spring, we'll be able to pick a couple small groups to test this on and see how a 2 or 3 day experience is going to run and be able to troubleshoot. We also really want to build out that, like I said, the community partnership model and how we can really benefit our student learning through that. Creation of Iowa City Talks. This one is, again, just bubbling at the surface, but an opportunity, again, for some extended learning, growing, and inspiring from people that are within our own district. And again, that would be students, former students, current employees, anybody. Local leaders, professionals, those kind of things. So we kind of like the lecture series at the university, but offer learning opportunities. Learn a skill, share a passion, etc. Matt had already mentioned this, but we already have student opportunities planned for the CFI this year that are already underway or planned. Our Art and Literacy Day, JA BizTown, College and Career Fair, and we really hope to host our first Iowa City Talks event. And I think, moving on. So the rest is going on to Lucas.
All right, thanks to Reagan, Superintendent Degner, as well as the great cross-section of staff members across our district that we have that have served on this team last year as well as this year. Reagan mentioned it. She probably understated it. It's really a set of brilliant minds. I'm pretty much there for comedic relief the majority of the time. So looking at one of the items that I'm extremely proud of that began last year, one of the sites that Reagan had mentioned that we visited was District 214 just outside of Chicago. We actually have been there twice now. One of the things that came out of that was really how impressed we were with how they identify, how they communicate, and how they really put into action the pathways. Now, what you're going to see here doesn't necessarily mean that we didn't have these in our district beforehand, but what we've really tried to do is streamline and really communicate and be efficient with what they look like in our building. Carmen is trying not to make eye contact with me because she does not want to speak at all. But really, Carmen and our curriculum coordinators have really done amazing work with this. And then once we get into what it looks like publicly as a public-facing document for our kids, Kristen and her team have done just fantastic work. So as we talk about where we've been and where we're going, I just want to highlight a couple of different things that are on here. Specifically where we've been is our special education student enrollment. One thing that we find with our students in special education, obviously they're identified in multiple or just a single goal area. And by needing that extra support to try to get them up to grade level with their peers, is they often miss out on some of the other classes that are really high interest, high engaging. And that's really a disservice to our students and their families. So what we started working with last spring with our building administrators, as well as in collaboration with our special education department, is what ways can we eliminate some barriers within their schedules so they do not have to eliminate those high interest, high engaging activities that they can then seek for post-secondary readiness. how can we make sure that those are part of their schedule and not being replaced by other things through their resource class or resource teacher. So really proud of those efforts about what we're doing to make sure that all of our students have access to those programs. That's not just lip service, but making sure that all students have those as part of the schedule. And then as we look towards where we're going, really it's about informing our students. You know, we go through the registration process the first part of the year. And one of the things that we've not done a great job, I think, within our district is making sure we outline what that 4-year plan looks like for our students. And the 4-year plan can sometimes be communicated to students in a building. They're supposed to take it home, have the families look at it. Who knows how much that is or is not done. And so a lot of the times we don't involve our families as part of that process. So we want to inform our students and inform our families about what those opportunities are for students once they get into the high school. And I also want to look at those concurrent enrollments. We have students that take many of our students that take classes out at Kirkwood. Great opportunity for kids. We just don't have enough of our kids doing it. Obviously, there's barriers that exist when we have our students leave the building. And one of the things that we want to look to do, and we've been partnering with Kirkwood since last year, is what can we do to bring those Kirkwood classes, those concurrent enrollment classes, back to our building or multiple ones inside of our building. Again, eliminate the barriers for students having to transport from one place to the next, and how can we put those in place within our buildings, and how can we get our staff the ability to teach those courses. So those are early ongoing conversations that we're having right now with the goal that we have more access for our students to get college credit beginning in their classes next year. One of the things I highlighted was just the work that Carmen has done, as well as her team, and Kristen has done. If you have not been to our website to take a look at this, it is phenomenal. I would put this up against any district in the state or anyone across the country as far as what this looks like aesthetically, as well as the type of information that's available for them. So we've really identified 34 different career pathways that students can examine, that they can explore. And then once they explore those, what does that look like then for me as a student? So with those 34 particular pathways, we've really narrowed in on what would that mean for a student over the course of 4 years. What are the types of classes they need to consider that would help with those particular pathways? I would encourage you again to go on our website. You could go into more detail. Right now we have human services highlighted on this. If you go to our website, you click on it, it creates a plethora of different opportunities for kids. What types of jobs, what types of internships, apprenticeships are out there? What things could they consider post-high school? It's really a piece of art and masterpiece that Kristen and her team have put together. Again, I would encourage you to explore that even more if you have not done so. And to our community members that are out there that have not been on there, really take an opportunity to see. Really, this highlights the great work that's going on in our buildings. And a lot of this work came through our Pathways team. We split into a few different core groups last year as part of our CFI leadership team. And one of the things we're constantly looking to do is to explore and expand those pathway opportunities for our kids through this.
Ooh, that was loud. Thank you, Lucas. Next part of the presentation here, I'd invite Nate Klein and Aaron Kurt from Junior Achievement to come on up to the podium. For us, as we continue to explore additional programming, you know, we identified an exciting partner in Junior Achievement that goes way beyond what all of us might know about Junior Achievement and what some of our vision for the future looks like with that. And so just kind of one piece to keep in mind as we kind of keep this straight in your head about the 3 different pieces here. So when we've talked about creating immersive learning experience through our CFI leadership team, that's a parallel path to kind of what we'll talk about here with the Junior Achievement experience and plan for partnership moving forward with them. So with that, I'll let Nate and Aaron kind of take it away and introduce themselves and Junior Achievement and some of the design for the future.
Great, thank you, Superintendent Degner. My name is Erin Kurt, and I'm the Executive Vice President at Junior Achievement of Eastern Iowa. I have been part of the organization for almost 20 years, starting on the education side and evolving with the organization as we have grown. We have worked with the Iowa City School District for over 40 years, every year serving students primarily in the elementary and junior high spaces over the years, different times with different focus areas. We focus on 3 main content areas. We look at financial literacy skills, work and career exploration, and entrepreneurship. And all of the programming that we do utilizes community volunteers and community experts to bring that content and that relevance into the experience that students have as part of junior achievement. That has evolved for us over the years. It used to be an after-school program. Anyone my age or older, that was their first experience with junior achievement, was an after-school setting. Then it became mainly in school, again, primarily at the elementary side. But especially in the past several years, one of the good things that came out of the pandemic for us is reimagining how we deliver programming, but also emphasizing the importance of hands-on learning in all grade levels and all directions that a student might be looking to engage in work following high school. And so we have really emphasized that in how we are working in terms of the partnerships that we have with our school districts, not just taking standard, the way we've done things in the past, but how can we partner with districts to make sure that we are supporting the needs of the district so that the districts are not having to recreate things. We can leverage our partnerships that we already have with the business communities and bring that to you as a district without you having to take on that burden yourselves. So that's something that we've been working with the district on for the past several years. And I'm gonna let Nate emphasize kind of the plan that we've come up with.
Thank you, Aaron. My name is Nate Klein. I serve as the Vice President for Education. I interned for Aaron 20-some years ago, and she brought me back. So I did a couple things right at that point in time. So like Aaron talked about, we have been working with the district partners for some time now. And it actually all started in a conversation with Superintendent Degner about a year ago when we asked him what the most exciting thing was on the plate for the coming year. And he talked about this physical space and what you all were thinking about doing to impact the students. Because what we've realized in working with our 18 other school districts, public education has become competitive. And how do we meet the students where they're at, not only to attract new students, but also to retain families and make them excited about the opportunities that are there, both in and outside the classroom. So we want to share a little bit today about what some of those opportunities are, and maybe starting a little bit of the why. So why Junior Achievement and Iowa City Community School District? We really align. And so when we started talking about some of these pathways, we also talked about what you all had done for the Portrait of a Graduate. And if you look at the Portrait of a Graduate and also the Junior Achievement Career Ready competencies, there's a lot of overlap, some even exact same language. And so when we're working with our schools and the district leaders, we're looking at very similar things about adaptability or creativity and innovation, critical thinking, cultural agility. And so there was already some common language that we were utilizing with the school district that seemed to work really well as we move forward. And so when we thought about what could be possible, we started to think about what we'll formally call the basement space would be and how we can have some of that common language K through 12. Because as Aaron talked about, we do a lot of work in the K through 12, and it's not just elementary focus, it's working throughout. And so when you think about an entire learner experience, those are some of the opportunities we thought we could bring to bear. A little bit more of the why, a shared purpose. Y'all are very passionate, and we've worked with many of your educators over the last year and learned about the passion they have for the students, starting from the classroom to administrators, really passionate about what they were doing. Today, we got to spend some time with about 450 City High students and also students from Tate at our 4th annual Career Inspire event. And so students got to see and open up the possibilities. Some of what we'll talk about from a work readiness perspective is really how do we open students' eyes? When I was growing up, I grew up in a household. I was a first-generation college student. My mom worked in HR, and my dad worked in manufacturing. And I thought those were the two possibilities, and like professional athlete. And I didn't make the cut, but it's fine. But I think students now probably think about those things and maybe like social media influencer, and we want to expand their horizons a little bit. So opportunities like Career Inspire give them that chance to see what is possible out there. So a shared purpose, also just common language. When we were talking with the superintendent and the leadership team, part of what they were really looking for over the last year is, okay, we found some partners that could be really good for like K through 4, and then some that are really good at the high school. How do we make sure that we have some common language throughout? And that's what Junior Achievement and the power of a network of about 100 different areas provides, is that content and curriculum that we've developed over 100 years now that supports students in and outside the classroom. A rich history. Aaron talked a little bit about 40 plus years with the district. I would be interested in learning what other partners, especially from a nonprofit perspective, have been partnering with y'all for that long. We're committed to y'all and this community and have been almost since our inception. And then also just the community connections. We've talked with a lot of educators as well. They want to bring the businesses into the classroom. And the businesses really want to be in the classroom because they understand the value of educating students. And they got a lot, both of them got a lot going on. And so we get to be that conduit and help connect them with not only our board of directors, but our trustees and other people that we're engaged with as well. And then there's a blank space. If you haven't been to what we're going to call the dream level, I think that's going to be approved by public relations. But if you haven't been to the space, it is an open space that is really exciting about the possibilities for students. And I think that's what this team was really looking at, is what are the possibilities for students to dream? And how do we get them outside of their comfort zone to think about what is possible, not just what is in front of them? And then integrated solutions. We've got a lot of fun things that we do and that we're tweaking a little bit specifically for Iowa City Schools that actually our JAUSA national team is really interested in learning more about. So we're excited to explore some of those innovative opportunities. I think we've seen a few different slides, and Adam was an exhilarating budget conversation about the next few years as well. I took a bunch of notes. I'm going to talk with my wife about budgeting when I get home. But I think the phases is really important, and to see that there's a long-term plan. And it's not just, hey, we're going to do this really shiny thing right now. It is a part of a longer-term plan. And that's what superintendent and the rest of his leadership team really talked about. So really tiny print here. I'll get into some of these. We'll talk about just phase 1 and phase 2 tonight, but open to questions about others as well. Some of these things we already have on the docket, and we're working towards already with your students and leadership team. What I also know to be true in working with many school districts is they're like, this sounds great, and how do you know that it's working? And so our commitment to you is that we will continue to measure the success. We do pre and post test assessments, just like many other educators do, to measure the knowledge gain. And so you'll see a little image here off to the right. That's just a snapshot of what Superintendent Degner is provided at the end of each year. So we look at knowledge gain. And then also with this more integrated partnership, we're looking at attitudinal shifts. And so when you talk with third graders about financial literacy, it's not necessarily talking about IPERS. It's talking about choices and needs and wants, and how do they have that conversation at home, or do they? And so as we measure this over the course of 5, 6, 7, 8 years, how do we see not only the knowledge gain, but also the attitudinal shifts? And so when we connect with the educators, we want to make sure that all of these state standards are still being met. It's not this additional thing that's on top of what they're doing, but it's really building upon the great work that they're doing in the classroom. So pre and post tests, and then a longitudinal study that will ensure that you all can see, and we can be accountable to you, that what we're doing matters, not only in the moment and the smiles on the students' faces, but also on the classroom in the books as well. Here is just a very high level. I'm going to talk about a couple of the experiences. One thing that we're really excited about is all of our kit-based programs. So if you've ever been a part of Junior Achievement, you probably recognize you have a volunteer walking in with a little clear bag kit, and they deliver 5 weeks worth of lessons. The students think that they're rock stars, especially K through 4. They ask for your autographs, and they're really excited, sometimes teaching very similar things to what the educator is, but it's a new person. And when you talk about mentorship and about bringing in people from the community, that's what it's really about, sharing those experiences. So what we're planning to do, based on some feedback from Eliza, Lucas, and others, is how can we make this specific to the Iowa City School District and also to the community? So instead of just having a volunteer come into a classroom for 5 weeks for 30 minutes to deliver a lesson, how do we utilize that CFI? How do we utilize that space to engage the community? And this is where we started to get a little creative. So for instance, at second grade, we deliver a lesson called JAR Community. I did this for my kiddos. I have a second and third grader. And at the fourth lesson of JAR Community, we talk about making pizza, which is exciting because everyone loves pizza. And so I give them little books that have stickers on them, and they put on anchovies, which is a weird thing for a second grader to think about on a pizza, but like cheese and pepperoni, and it's cool and it's exciting for them. Well, why not engage someone from the community like a Brandon Pratt, who has made an investment in this community to build many restaurants, franchise out pizza ranches, and have him come with the students from second grade at that lesson and have them make their own pizza. And so how do we make those memorable experiences for students? Because when a second grader goes to Pizza Ranch, they don't think about the jobs associated with it. They just think about delicious cactus bread. Like, that is the thing they think about. They don't think someone had to source that food. They had to have a purchaser. They had to have a cashier, an owner of the business. And so how do we make some of this learning more real, utilizing the space you all have as well? So building some of those experiential learning opportunities, those immersive experiences in every single grade, and doing it in a phased approach so that students get excited in elementary school for the things they're already experiencing in middle and high school. So as you can see in every grade level here, we're planning to have some of those immersive experiences, that hands-on experiential learning that will make students really excited and engaging the teachers in the process as well. Then comes the dream level, which I don't think we've trademarked yet, but we're working on that. We're good? Okay, great. So the dream level, the basement just doesn't sound as exciting. So when you say students, you get to visit the dream level. We're gonna show a video here in a moment. I am not an architect by nature, but I think Lucas had a pathway I can go back to school for, so thank you. But this is what it could be possible. We'll show a little bit about kind of phase one with the JA Dream Accelerator, which a couple board members are going to visit here in about actually a week from today. We'll be amidst a 24-hour whirlwind tour. JA of Rocky Mountain put together this amazing space, and we'll show it here in a video in a second. Also, a lot of work on the trades. I know several years ago I worked at Mount Mercy for 9 years, and it was everyone go to a four-year college. And the pendulum has swung, everyone do the trades. And I think landing somewhere in the middle where students really are wanting to be, giving them that pathway to purpose would be really important. So how do we provide those opportunities to both see the trades and see what's possible with different opportunities as well? So we'll show a little bit about what those assets could look like. In phase one, we would continue with K through 8 programming. So we talked about that integrated language programs, the kit-based programs in the classroom. Reagan talked a little bit about this as well. JA BizTown, if none of you have seen this opportunity, I highly recommend joining your 6th graders. It's an amazing opportunity where students at 6th grade run a town. Would they elect a mayor? They have proclamations. They have a DJ. They vote up or down statues of themselves, which is really exciting. And they do voting. They talk about civic responsibility. So having 6th graders talk about payroll and expenses is not something that I talked about during my first several jobs. And so having them have that experience starts to open their eyes a little bit more to the world of work. I often talk to districts about the analogy of you wouldn't just throw a student without any mathematics into geometry in high school. But we do that with work readiness. We just start talking about it in 8th, 9th, and 10th grade. So why not start talking about the world of work beforehand so they can get excited about what some of those possibilities are? Innovation experiences I already talked about, BizTown Mobile, Finance Park. So we have a back-end system that we provide students an opportunity to learn about the real world. And they get assigned a different job. They learn about their finances. They learn about budgeting. They talk about what it means to take a loan out, what is insurance. And if you want to be a teacher, maybe having 2 jet skis right out of school is not possible. So maybe resetting some of those expectations with some of those capstone experiences. And then the Dream Accelerator, which I believe is going to be this next slide. So the Dream Accelerator, we've kind of in our head dreamed out what this space could look like, working with Superintendent Degner and others, about 4,000 to 5,000 square foot. We would staff that. I know we talked a little bit earlier about the budget from a budget perspective. Junior achievement staff would be there to support this. So it wouldn't necessarily be an FTE ad for y'all. It would be focused on how do we deliver and work with y'all to deliver some of that curriculum. So JA of Rocky Mountain, which is in the Denver area, dreamt up this idea to have students come and experience around the 9th grade level what it means to learn about themselves and what careers are possible. So when you talk about 34 different pathways that are out there, how do students even get interested in some of those pathways? And that's what this experience is about, to build upon what the Career Inspire experience is, to also have the Dream Accelerator. So I'll show you here in a moment what that would look like. This would be the 2nd Dream Accelerator in the nation. So I've also learned your educators are super competitive, which is great. So they're very excited to be like the 2nd in the nation if this kind of all goes through as well. So I'm going to show this short video, and I believe that it will work.
The Dream Accelerator for me is a dream come true. I actually got to work with the design team, and really from a teacher perspective, we wanted something that would be interactive. Where students weren't bored, or there weren't students that got to just sit on the side and do nothing. This experience is absolutely incredible.
The benefit of coming here is you get to explore your options and you get to find who you are. And by finding who you are, you can make decisions on what you want to do in life.
Feels good.
Not only will this help you make financial goals, but career goals.
It shows that I could work at a restaurant, start a catering business, find and follow a chef online.
This is literally the only time I've had my students able to really see their careers and almost make it more concrete. I mean, a personality assessment's one thing, but to see it come alive in an experience like this is absolutely incredible.
One of my favorite ones was the reality check, and so my lifestyle that I definitely want to have eventually is not going to be the one that I want out of college, but then we minimized it down to something that I'll have right after college.
It's eye-opening for sure.
I was going through the options and I was like, should I just use a used car?
It's really inspiring, everything. It's really helping me narrow down my career paths.
Take the time to do it. It's great. You'll see more excitement come back to your classroom. It's going to make kids more appreciative of the learning that they're happening because they're starting to see the path for the first time that's laid out in front of them rather than guessing or saying, why do I need this? This actually helps make what we do in the classroom more concrete for students.
I would really recommend it to stay true to yourself.
If you're not sure if it's something that your district should be doing, try it out as an adult. You actually will be probably just as impressed as I was. I can tell you just from seeing my students, seeing the light bulbs click on and having them start asking me more questions, I mean, it's changing their lives.
Where are we at on this experience?
I would say this is a 10 out of 10 experience. I would totally come do this again.
Thank you, Rocky Mountain Junior Achievement. You've made this possible. It's absolutely incredible.
So as you can see, they spent a lot of time on what that could look like for their particular area. And I will make this a little bigger. So the Dream Accelerator, I'll briefly explain the 5 areas. So first off, students start off with a portrait of what they would look like. And they start to select some of those things that they have talents and skills and abilities. Next off, they learn about titans of business. And we would really work with y'all to localize that. So having students see themselves in the local community. So having John Papa John or the CEO of Integrated DNA Technologies, having localized people so that they can see themselves from their seats into their local community. Next is that reality check. And so they get to realize that, hey, if I want to do this, this is the type of careers and this is the type of expenses I might entail. The next one is how do you interact and engage with entrepreneurs, or how do you be entrepreneurial? So we imagine having the Pancheros CEO talk about, hey, I started with one store here, but I'm gonna have students interact and engage in a fun and playful way. Where should I have had my next store? Should it have been at the Ped Mall or should it have been at Coral Ridge Mall? And so students having those real life decisions with people and places that they've actually been. And then lastly, they end, I think you saw some of the students with iPads, when you put their future in their hands, they start to see what's possible. And so when they can explore these different pathways, what you've talked about already, they can select, oh, if I want to get into the medical field, but I don't like blood, cool, there is a pathway for me. And I can start to understand what is possible that then builds back to the classroom. So your teachers and your educators, I talked with an educator today that has been doing AVID and teacher education for 25 years at City High, and how excited they are to talk about career pathways and what this tool would be able to provide to them as well. So we're really excited to learn more about the Dream Accelerator. I hope you will get excited about it as well. And again, this is something that from a JA perspective is possible. What's really exciting is JA Rocky Mountain developed it. So as part of a Junior Achievement Network, we get to steal it or just use it because they've developed all the intellectual property. We just have to localize it. And so what's really great is they've spent a lot of capital resources that you all wouldn't have to spend as well. And so there is a timeline to be able to implement this depending on when you all would want to launch and what construction timelines would look like as well. But when we worked with our national staff to come up with kind of a timeline, it would be feasible to launch something this next school year, to have a grand opening so that students could have their own dream day in their very near future. What's really special about this is the one in JA Rocky Mountain was for all districts in the area, so they just built it for 9th grade. What we would do with Iowa City school districts is start off in the 8th or 9th grade, and then we would build it backwards. So then maybe the next year we'd focus on 7th grade, and then maybe even 5th grade. So we can track students' attitudes and abilities throughout, so we can help them along those pathways as well, because we know their minds will change, and they will get excited about different things in different times, but helping them see what's possible is really what that would be about. Phase 2 would bring in some new assets as well. 3DE is a paradigm shift for high school education, and so focusing on case-based and project-based learning. You talked a little bit about Trace Pickering before in Iowa Big. Some of those project-based learning methodologies have been really beneficial at the collegiate level, and they're seeing much more benefit as well at the high school level. We've actually launched that with a couple districts, College Community and Albernet this year. Next year, another school district just a little north in the Cedar Rapids area will be adopting it. So talking with the leaders here about what that could look like. And then focusing on STEM and the trades. And so there are some assets at JA St. Louis that we visited that are really exciting, that would engage students in hands-on learning to learn about how do you operate a forklift? How do you operate BIM? How do you use Oculus to be able to understand how do you become an electrical worker and work on the post as well? So a lot of opportunities for some more hands-on learning that would be a part of phase 2. This is a picture of the Iowa City Community School District leaders beating the JA staff in this particular event. We didn't let them win. They won fair and square. But it was really about how do you have these hands-on experiences for students to come and learn, okay, if we'll go back to the pizza example, there's a lot that happens before that pepperoni pizza lands on a plate. And so how do we back up all the way to the farmer planting the seeds? And so students can really see the possibilities of STEM type of careers in any aspect of the production line facility as well. So this build out of the JA Biz Park or the JA Trades would be in the main space of the Dream level. And that would allow opportunities for students at 6th grade to do JA Biz Town, at 8th grade to do JA Finance Park, and then also be able to integrate the JA Trades through that space as well. So as you can see here, Eliza is working on her licensure to be able to operate a forklift. She was moving a lot of rocks, and she's a really great job. It only buzzed several times. But what's really exciting about some of these things is some of these simulations, if you spend enough hours on it, you can also get certified. So when you talk about meeting with the state representatives and they talk about every single high school student getting some work-based learning experience, it is hard to imagine how do you scale an internship for 1,000 students? Are there things that you could do in your own physical space that allow those students to happen right on your campus versus going out somewhere else to do that? And that's what we're trying to dream and what we think is possible as well. This would be a first in the nation collaboration. There are no other JA sites, there are no other school districts that are bringing these assets together to allow students to have a really truly integrated experience. There's the JA Rocky Mountain that's doing this, JA St. Louis is doing some of this. And when we talk about this with our national partners, they're really excited about the possibility for y'all to consider what this partnership could look like, a truly integrated partnership to prepare students to lead choice-filled lives. And that's where we're really excited. How do we inspire those students to have that possibility? Last, a cost overview slide. So I think Superintendent Degner may step in here a little bit as well, but as we cost some of these things out, some of that cost is going to come back to junior achievement. We are going to provide the FTE to help run and support these assets. So when a student comes in or a student group from City High or Liberty comes in to have their dream day, we will be there to help support. It won't necessarily be pulling an FTE out of y'all's classroom because we know what you all are being dedicated and asked to do in the classroom as well. So we have that expertise, we would continue. Y'all have the space and the assets are built in different spaces. So now it's just about understanding what that would look like within y'all's budget, but then also being able to look at those different buckets that Adam talked about and what fits best for you and your budgets going forward to ensure students both stay here and are attracted to be here as well. A lot of exciting opportunities, I think, not just during the school year. Eliza has talked about what summer camps and programs could be. So inviting students maybe from other districts during the summer, and they get excited about that space, and maybe they decide that they're going to be Iowa City Community School District students as well. really awesome opportunities along that. So we have the dream phase, which is this fiscal year, the launch phase, which would be next fiscal year, and then phase 2, which is the inspire phase, would be fiscal year 27 as well. So spreading out some of those experiences over that time. So I believe that is all that we have. Thank you for the
Thank
time.
you,
We'll be
Nate.
here for questions.
Yes. So Nate said I would jump in here a little bit on the cost overview slide. So just a couple notes. If you notice on the Dream, Launch, and Inspire, that doesn't add up to the 5.6, right? So that's kind of the all-in cost when considering all of the phases of the project. So really the first considerations for the board would be getting us started with the Dream and Launch pieces as we would work through that. And then of course, we would have some evidence of success, to come back before we would commit those additional dollars. But I thought it was important if we had a projected all-in cost to share that with you guys tonight. And as Nate referenced, and we heard about the buckets tonight, I think it's important to differentiate those buckets, that we know that these costs are really capital costs for us, that there's not a general fund impact on the costs shown here on this slide. And so, and again, a big contribution from Junior Achievement, not only on the intellectual property end, but on the staffing end, knowing that really part of our goal is to make sure we have a pathway to achieve those portrait of a graduate competencies and skills without pulling resources away from our classroom. So I realize this was a big update tonight with a lot of information. Thank Director Finch for kind of bringing this to us here a month or two ago and asking for where we've at. As you can tell, we were excited to share a lot of the work with you, and we'll continue to update the board and the community about our progress there. But if you have questions at this point, we'd be happy to answer them.
The percentages up there, is that the percent that Iowa City Community School District would be covered? Like it says 32% of expenses for DREAM, 54% of expenses for STEM 360.
Great question. So the percentages are actually a breakdown of the total. So 1.95 million, 32% of that is for the DREAM Accelerator, and then 54% is for STEM. So it's broken down. Those are all the Iowa City School District costs. Just
Thank
broken down
you.
differently.
And thank you both for your presentation tonight. I forgot to start with that, so I apologize.
I'm going to go off script here and not talk about money,
Wow, I'm excited.
but I am going to talk about how attractive these approaches are to kids of color. The district population now is half kids of color and half white. So what are we going to be offering that's going to be attractive to all kids in the district?
Yeah, I think it's really important to not only understand your demographics, but as we talked about specifically like the DREAM Accelerator, having a representative sample of the entrepreneurs that are in the area to be present in the classroom. Not just the volunteers, but the titans of business that would be featured, be reflective of the students that are also in the classroom. So we would really partner with y'all, work with City Council, others. We also have a long history with our Business Hall of Fame. So people that have invested, we just actually recognized one of your graduates that you may have heard of before, Nate Kading. So he was actually featured for Junior Achievement as well. But we have many other board members that would be representative of the students that are your district, and working with various populations to ensure that was possible.
A big goal for us early on, Charlie, and the Center for Innovation leadership team's work was how do we, this question about all kids. I think that was an initial stumbling block for us about anything we create at the center. How do we make sure it's truly accessible for everybody and that everybody has an opportunity to do that? One of the pieces I've been the most excited about with this is that every student would have a touch point, right? It wouldn't be a pathway for only some kids or only a few hundred of our kids to experience. This would be really an opportunity for every kid in the district multiple times throughout their K-12 experience to have an opportunity to be there, and not just a select few that get accepted into some different type of a school or innovative pathway. So, and then just the personalization, I think, of the opportunities offered, right? I mean, it's that pathway to purpose. It's figuring out how do I connect to my purpose in life and find a pathway that speaks to me to do that, which is unique and speaks to everybody individually, no matter your background.
Thanks for the presentation. I appreciate it. I really appreciated the phrase, the attitudinal shift that you used, Nate, because, I see this at work, right? Where it's like I teach somebody how to do something, they're learning it in the moment, but it's not like absorbed into it because it's just very focused in the time. So how they're talking about it after the fact. And it came right back when we were watching the video to see the kids say, oh, should I just get a used car? And in my head, I'm like, yeah.
Yes,
I've
please
been
do.
telling you
Your
as your
first car,
parent for the
used
last
car.
10 years, and you haven't listened to me. You might listen to somebody else and change your attitude because you don't always hear it from your parent. The whole idea of immersive learning experience, like I think we've called it like a school of the wild kind of thing, because that's what I think of what our district has done as the most immersive thing is the School of the Wild. And it has been so successful and so popular that I can only imagine if we did more, right, of how successful and popular that would be. So thank you.
Yeah. To see some of your students today at Career Inspire, putting their hands on brains, hammering nails, some of them for the first time, doing virtual reality welding, it was a powerful just sample size of what could be possible moving forward as well. So I think the hands-on experiences, they do great things in the classroom, and that's the foundation to build upon these other things.
I also might ask, there are many local labor organizations that are working very hard to put together apprenticeship approaches for students coming out of the high schools. And I assume that's something that could be easily included in these experiences.
100% yes. We actually, when we do 3DE with one of our other districts, one of the cases that we're working on is with the Iowa City and Cedar Rapids Trades Group. They are so excited to help change the attitude and the understanding of what is possible for students. Today we had the IBEW there having students run electrical cords through pipes. If you haven't been to the dream level, we've even talked about leaving some of that space open within code to have students understand, like, okay, that's HVAC, like real life. What does that look like? And how could that be a job for me as well? And so I think some really exciting opportunities with the space that you have too.
Fantastic.
What I really like about this is the community involvement. I'm going to maintain some healthy skepticism about some of the other things as well. Number one, the screen time. We've been talking the last several months about whether or not that's healthy, and now we're introducing more screens. Whether or not this would impact our general fund, we do have to consider transportation, and as volunteers are great, but also just the reliance on volunteers.
Yep.
So I just want to be realistic about that. I signed up to be a JA volunteer last year for kindergarten, and actually I wasn't able to do it because I didn't have time. But I know that the first lesson is wants versus needs, right? Okay, so
Best at Christmas time, by the way.
Okay.
Around Christmas time, that's when I love to teach the most.
So we are already getting some pushback from community about whether or not this is a want, this is a need, and so I am one of the 2 board members that are going next week, and so I'm looking forward to that. I'm hoping to gain more insight into determining that question, the answer to that. So, but thank you for your presentation tonight.
Just kind of following off of that note, and this is something I don't expect you to have tonight, Superintendent Degner, but an idea of, with all that technology, would that require an FTE to maintain all those programs and everything that's going on there? Just something to consider in that.
I do not believe so, that's something, we're not looking at any additional FTE investment on this end. I think we also just, just to address a couple of things talked about that, technology is still real. Kids are still going to have to access technology. We're still going to have some screen time. And so I think, from some of the examples that Nate provided about the amount of hands-on opportunities for the balance with tech, that was an important piece to us, because Reagan and I have had many conversations. High tech doesn't mean innovative. You can be just as boring and just as lack innovation with technology too. And so I think that was an important factor for us. So there's an element of that is this, but really when you look at that larger space, the JA trades and the finance park and the BizTown and what those experiences on there, it was important to us to give an immersive School of the Wild type experience to our students where they really are immersed in something different. But doing some of the more dynamic ends of the career planning and being able to quickly access and react to opportunities, that's where we can leverage technology as a resource, right? Not in a negative way, not in an exorbitant way that's going to dominate their week, but in a nice in and out experience in that fashion. And as far as a want or a need, I think that goes back to, you know, the end goal about what we're trying to prepare our students for, right? And we've determined that those core competencies are important to us, that those skills are important, and our students' acquisition of those and having a purpose once they leave K-12 education. We need to make sure they have a ticket to do something, right? When they're leaving here, what is next, right? We know a high school diploma is not sufficient for success at the next level. And so the more kids that have that pathway determined and they know what their purpose is, in my view, that's a need, right? That's mission critical for all of our students to have that accomplished. So again, I think the healthy skepticism is great. I think we all entered with that same healthy skepticism, and I think you guys are asking all of the right questions.
If I could just touch on a couple things. So like JBizTown, for example, there's some technology involved with that. That all fell on our staff. Y'all had FTEs that were there, but they were there to chaperone the students. But we took care of all the technology, and the exact same model would be here for whether it's the Dream Accelerator, Finance Park, or others. That would be a part of that $1.2 million that we are investing over the 5 years from a staffing perspective as well. And just anecdotally as well, we are working with another district on some of the things that we've talked about here, but on a much smaller scale. And their superintendent said in a board meeting the other day how they've had 5 families call and their 8th graders are wanting to come into their high school open enroll next year because of some of those innovative things. So it is that delicate balance of needs and wants, making an exciting thing for students, but also you want to retain and attract. And so what does that balance really look like? And you'll learn more in the years to come. So.
Thank you all so much. Oh, go ahead.
Is it a
just
budget question?
No, I just want to clarify that my enthusiasm for this initiative is unbridled.
I can feel it.
Thank you, Director Easttown.
And,
Okay.
I know I don't often come across that way, but this is a great thing to do. This is a great use of this building. Having this building is a great thing for the district.
I don't know how you end better than that.
Well, I have to sort of tie it in a bow as board president, so, but no, thank you all for the presentation. And, you know, I am really excited to hear more. I'm not part of the group going to Denver, but I look forward to hearing the sharing of reporting out of their experience. But I'm really excited about the immersive experience for our students, the possibilities for that. Being a student in a vocational high school, I knew how important that was to try different things that weren't necessarily available to me, so I can know, nope, I don't like HVAC and definitely not electrical. Let me go to college because this is not for me. I think that's important for our students to try lots of different things so they can find their niche and perhaps not spend thousands of dollars on a degree that they don't necessarily need to be successful. So with that, thank you all so much. Next up, we have our action items. The first one is the School Budget Review Committee application for special education deficit. There is a recommended action listed on the agenda.
Just read the motion, yeah. I move to approve the resolution that the Board of Directors of Iowa City Community School District approve the request for allowable growth and supplemental aid payment for a negative special education balance for the fiscal year 23-24. The final amount of the special education balance and amount of supplemental aid will be determined by the Department of Education after all special education balances have been finalized.
Second.
Are there any questions or points of discussion? Hearing none, Board Secretary Coven, ready to vote?
Online voting is open. All votes have been cast and the motion carries with all directors voting in favor.
Thank you. Next up is the Mid-American Energy Easement. Are there any questions or a motion?
Motion to approve.
Second.
Any discussion? Hearing none, Board Secretary Coven, we're ready to vote.
Online voting is open. All votes have been cast, and the motion carries with all directors voting in favor.
Thank you. Next, that takes us to agenda setting. We have, our next meetings will be on November 12th, and just a point for those watching and sitting here with us, that will be the only meeting in November for us. We will start with our regular board meeting, and we have the standard items, but several discussion items as well as presentations. So it looks as though we're going to have a busy night with our regular meeting. Or if there are items that directors would like to ensure we have in the parking lot, please do reach out to Superintendent Degner or Vice President Abraham or myself so we can make sure those are there. And after our regular board meeting, we will have our organizational annual meeting, and Board Secretary Coven will take over the chair, will elect board president, vice president, and we'll move to our annual approvals of consent agenda items. Are there any questions? Go ahead, Director Eastham.
I wonder, Superintendent Degner, if you're going to have a chance to, or you anticipate having a chance to talk to us about the results of your meetings with the, I'm sorry, I'm
Community
blanking on
commenters?
grades. The Palestinian group, right, yeah.
Yeah, I can, I'm thinking about, we'll definitely have had the meeting, Charlie, and then we could either provide another equity update there, or I could even provide something written, to the board, follow-up of that. And so we can kind of play that one by ear, and either you'll see a written comment or we can add some to the agenda.
Yeah, thanks. I just wanted to assure the group that we're continuing to
Absolutely.
to consider what their interests are.
So I had two things beyond what's on here. One would be asking the board about a potential work session for the cell phone conversation rather than at the board table that night. I think what we'll probably be most ready for in November there is to look at that feedback that we've been working with the association to gather. And so it might be better to do it conversationally, and we didn't really have an operations topic identified for the 12th. So if you guys are okay, we try to do a 5 o'clock work session that evening. And then the second one is you're going to see a note from me about the certified, not the certified annual report, about the annual progress report with achievement data. We're still waiting to get designations from the state and some further indicators from them, as well as our overall proficiency data, as well as growth data. They take out some select students every year before determining our final place on that, and we're not sure when we're going to get our ESSEC designations because of that model being new. So we may not have the annual progress report ready for November. We'll wait till we have that complete data set.
Okay, thank you for that, Superintendent Degner. Are there any other items? Hearing none, is there a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Seconded.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Meeting adjourned. Thank you, everyone. Get home safely.